Welcome back. So far, President Trump has been a hit on Wall Street, but could some of his proposed actions change that in a big way? So far, he has scrapped the Trans-Pacific Partnership, threatened to put a tariff on products from Mexico to pay for the wall. On the other hand, he also wants to roll back some regulations of the financial system to help U.S. corporations compete overseas. Joining us for more on tonight's topic is Richard Stern, business commentator for ABC7 News, Tracy Collins, an assistant professor of economics at New College of Florida, and Sarah Blackwell, attorney at the Blackwell firm. She is also the co-founder and CEO of Protect U.S. Workers. Thank you all for being here tonight. Richard, for the last 2 months, ever since, actually before the election, we talked about how Wall Street would react if Trump won or Hillary won. It's been a pretty good ride so far for Trump. There has been a little pause from now and then as some of these issues have come up with Mexico and China. Where do we sit right now?
Well, Alan, it's interesting. First of all, let me acknowledge that most of us on Wall Street were totally wrong. The perception was that if Mr. Trump were to become the president, the market would implode, crater, take whatever words you'd like. And as of last night, from Election Day forward, both the Dow and the NASDAQ are up by 9% plus. The Standard & Poor's up by 7% plus. So I think what's happening is people are realizing that perhaps the world has not come to an end, and there may be some pretty profitable companies out there.
But does that mean that Wall Street has not taken into consideration yet what would happen if we did put tariffs on products from Mexico coming in, or China for that matter?
I think it's very likely that we don't know how to quantify it at this point. We really don't know what we're looking at. We don't know what the tax rules are going to be. There are more things that we don't know, I think, than we know at this point. But I think what Wall Street, you got to remember my background, everything is based on earnings, dividends, gross revenues, et cetera. And right now, so far, those have not been a problem at all.
But Tracy, if you saw The Economist and Kate's story, there are significant concerns among economists about what would happen if we got into this kind of trade war, tit for tat, with Mexico or China. Is that basically the prevailing wisdom in the economic world?
Yeah, because most people, agree with The Economist that was on that a trade war would be very detrimental to the economy. And the reason why is if you increase tariffs, that's going to increase prices for goods here in the United States. That's going to hurt, average workers, and that's going to cause inflation. And that will ultimately lead to even unemployment. So it's not a good policy prescription, and it doesn't really get to the heart of the problem, which Trump doesn't address, which is the fact that technology has caused more unemployment. The research over and over again tells us that technology has caused more unemployment than trade.
And I was going to ask you some other questions, but that segues very nicely into Sarah. Sarah is known nationally now for representing former IT workers at Disney who were basically outsourced, allegedly, by foreign workers, and they lost their jobs in Orlando. And Sarah, are those concerns being addressed, if you've seen already, by the new administration and the new Senate and Congress?
Well, I think what she meant by technology taking some of the jobs is automation. But what I deal with is not only Disney, but 50, 60 companies right now that are doing the same as Disney did, which is offshoring all of the work out of the country. Just as manufacturing has gone to China and Mexico, the technology jobs are going to mainly India, Philippines, and other countries. So because it's cheaper labor in India for technology, just like it is for manufacturing in China and Mexico, they're doing the same thing. And we have lost hundreds of thousands of jobs in the last couple of years to India through H-1B foreigners coming in, and also through the offshoring. So we've lost jobs, and to be honest, I sort of disagree with the idea that raising the prices is going to cause us to have more unemployment, because right now the thousands of people I speak with are being fired from their jobs. We won't have the consumers, and all we're doing is trying to level out the playing field. Globalism and capitalism is amazing as long as we're not racing to the bottom. The reason that these companies go to the reason the straws are going over from China is because they're cheaper. Why are they cheaper? Because they are taking advantage of the workers there by paying them very little, working them very hard, and violating their human rights over there in China without taking into account what's going on in those countries.
Tracy, let me give you an opportunity to address that, because you often hear that argument from many folks in the conservative circles that, hey, there's nothing wrong with forcing U.S. employers to pay more money to compensate for the fact that goods and services that one used to get from Mexico and China and abroad are going to cost more.
Mm-hmm. So then what is the logic? So let's increase prices because of the fact that they're coming in, but if we do still, put a tax on imports or even a tariff, then once again, that's still going to create inflation in our economy. And if that creates inflation in our economy, and if profits decrease, then we're still going to get higher unemployment.
All right, there's so much more to discuss. I also want some help in terms of explaining to our viewers tonight exactly what do we talk about when we refer to a trade war. What could happen? Is there any precedence from it? When was the last time there really was an era where we were in a trade war with other nations?
Mm-hmm. I would go back to when was an era we had high tariffs, maybe not so much as a trade war, but high tariffs, and that's before. After we're talking about World War I type economies. So it's been decades since we've had high tariffs.
All right, Richard, I'm not going to ask you if you remember when that happened.
No, I wasn't around quite more.
But we're going to get into a little bit more in our next segment. We're just getting started in our discussion today under President Trump and the economy. Our discussion continues right after a check on our weather, so stay with us. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we are discussing the economy under President Trump and how his policies could impact Americans like you. Our guests tonight are Richard Stern, business commentator for ABC7 News, Tracy Collins, assistant professor of economics at New College, and Sarah Blackwell, attorney and founder of Protect U.S. Workers. And Tracy, we were talking before the break about the possibility of a trade war if we get into a situation where we raise tariffs on Mexico for to pay for the wall that President Trump wants to build, or we get into tit for tat with China. And you said that we have not had a trade war since before World War I. But for people who don't necessarily understand what a trade war is, what would that look like?
So by a trade war, what we mean is that, for example, if we decide to raise tariffs on China by 20%, then China retaliates and they decide to raise tariffs on us by 30%. And then America retaliates again and decides, okay, we're going to raise tariffs on China by 40%. And that's exactly what a trade war would look like.
How likely in the big picture is it for this to happen?
I don't think it's likely, because if anyone listens to Trump's rhetoric, he's been pretty soft on China. If you look during the campaign, he always talked about China, right? China, they were just so aggressive with us. They were just, they ripped us off.
Currency manipulator.
Currency manipulator. They got all the best trade deals, and he was going to slap, 45%. It was like 45% tariffs on them, 48% tariffs on them. And then, we have the inauguration, and Trump is silent. He actually picks a weaker country like Mexico to pick on. It's very unsuccessful, but he doesn't really say anything to China. And the reason why is because, China, the government of China actually issued a warning to Trump, and they said, go for it. They said, start a trade war. They said America will actually lose more than we will. And I don't think it's likely, because if you listen to Trump's rhetoric since he's been inaugurated, he hasn't even mentioned China.
Well, it might be because if we get into a trade war with China, the price of Trump ties would go up markedly.
Well.
But still, an incredible percentage of U.S. trade is with Mexico, and that would have an impact on our economy in a big way, I would imagine.
Yes, it would. Yeah, because about 45% of jobs even, depend on trade with Mexico. Are linked to trade with Mexico as well.
Yeah, Sarah, it's one thing to say America first, and we all believe in America first, but should something like that happen with whether not just Mexico but with China, I don't know if Americans are really prepared for that kind of inflation, which we really have not seen for many years.
Well, I do not believe that any tariff would be sanctioned or would be a way to bully another country. The purpose of the tariff is to try to get a level field for our Americans to compete, our American workers to compete. If India or China or Mexico will not protect their own citizens by requiring a minimum wage and protections under employment, we have to then step up and say, okay, well, our American workers who cannot opt out of their minimum wage, their worker protections. We require that because it's a human rights issue.
Yeah,
so then you add the tariff.
Yeah.
We're trying to just make it an even playing field. So these companies with the straw that say, I have to go to China because it's cheaper, what if it's not cheaper? What if it's the same amount? Now you're going to hire Americans.
But let me just ask you this. Let's say we start charging Mexico a 25% tariff to finance the wall. Wouldn't Mexico just say, well, you know what, we're going to charge a 25% tariff on American goods coming into Mexico, and wouldn't that infect American companies and American workers?
Okay, so I would not be about any kind of tariff to pay for the wall or for any financial sanctions. The only thing I deal with is protecting American workers and protecting workers outside the United States with their human rights issues. So if you're doing it for a purpose other than to equal out the level field, then no, I have no opinion on that whatsoever. But I think if you're putting a tariff on because you want the goods to come in and be about the same price as you would if you manufactured it here, then the reason is, it's not, the actual reason is so that you'd buy American.
Tracy, historically, has that worked?
Has putting a tariff on to, that's what I'm going to address, because I believe that we should protect American workers, but I don't think it's through tariffs. I think it's through regulations that say if you want to do business in China, then you only can use manufacturers excuse me, who do have a good record on human rights. It's not through we're going to slap tariffs across the board on imports from China. I think it's saying, okay, we require you to work with companies in China who have a good record, who are paying the Chinese at least the equivalent of a living wage in China, and who are making sure that factories are safe and that workers do have time to, you know, relax and they aren't working 23 hours.
I want to get back to Wall Street in a moment, but the president has also said that he wants to reduce the regulations on U.S. companies. So I don't know if we're going to be getting any kind of new regulations that deal with manufacturing overseas anytime soon.
But I see that that's more effective. If he really wants to protect American workers, I believe that's more effective than tariffs. And I also believe that he should address the fact of the government can get involved and give money to workers who need to be retrained because they have been outsourced or they've lost their jobs because
especially
the market is changing. So for me, these are effective strategies, giving workers money to even relocate to different locations if they have to, making unemployment insurance last longer than what it typically has. Those are effective strategies. Slapping a tariff across the board on China or Mexico, for me, those are ineffective and
Richard,
they don't work.
Among some of the other proposals the president is making is rolling back Dodd-Frank, which for people who don't know what that is, those were the financial regulations put into effect after the Great Recession to prevent the banks from doing what the banks did.
Correct.
The other, which directly affects your line of work, is the Obama administration in the waning days put together rules that folks like you have a fiduciary responsibility to your clients to make transactions that would be in their best interest. Trump is now talking about getting rid of that. What's your opinion?
Well, I don't think there's any question that we in our industry, and I've been a financial advisor for 41 years and have great pride in what I do, the standard has always been what's called suitability. Is it suitable? The problem with what's been proposed and now hopefully gone away is that there are two completely different standards. The retirement accounts are the only ones that were addressed by the fiduciary rule. I now become a fiduciary as opposed to simply determining suitability, but I'm only a fiduciary in your IRA or your 401k. If you have a joint account with your spouse or you have a single name account, now the standards become entirely different.
Well, let me push back a little bit, because maybe shouldn't you have a fiduciary responsibility to all investment accounts, because after all, your customers, I would imagine, would want to be assured that you have their best interests in mind all the time.
Absolutely. I don't question that for a second. I don't think my colleagues in the industry question that either. The problem, though, becomes understanding exactly what the Department of Labor was trying to say. This was an 1,100-page document written by someone who certainly didn't have any experience in the world of investing and simply didn't address the fact that we do follow those standards on a regular basis.
And finally, Tracy, what do you make of the fact that since the election, the stock market has climbed steadily? We just passed a milestone just last week.
He's right. You know, I was shocked. No, you were absolutely right. I was shocked because I really thought when Trump won, I imagined an apocalypse, and I just saw the stock market crashing. But it seems like what he's saying, you know, investors, they like the fact that we had this nice transition of power. They like the fact that Trump is talking about deregulating markets, lowering taxes, which again, the effective tax rate is literally 15%, so that's kind of smoke screenish. If he actually got rid of regulations to where it's not so onerous to get from the tax rate that's over 30% where you have to hire so many lawyers, actually get you down to 15% or 0%, then okay, yeah, I can understand that. But it seems like investors, they like all this.
Okay.
No question.
Yeah.
Let's take a quick break, and when we return, we'll have final thoughts from our guests, plus what some of our viewers are saying about a tiny solution to a big issue of affordable housing. Welcome back. Wall Street has welcomed President Trump with open arms, but will deregulation and a reworking of trade deals benefit the average American? Our guests join us right now for final thoughts. And Richard, we were talking during the break. You have some thoughts in terms of the potential of putting tariffs on countries like Mexico and China. That scares you.
I think what scares me is the fact that we really don't know what we're dealing with. Pretend for a minute that you're the CEO of McDonald's or Coca-Cola or Procter & Gamble. These companies, the three that I mentioned, all do well over 50% of their business outside of the United States. So what kinds of things are they going to have to do to conform? What kinds of tariffs are going to impact them in which country, and how do they price things? I think it's something that, again, it's going to be a long time before we figure it out.
You know, every administration that does come in has, you know, the smartest and brightest people from their political philosophy. I would imagine that that the law of unattended consequences is something that would come into the conversation, Tracy.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I just want to end by saying that sometimes politicians and even economists come up with things that they think sound well and might even look good on paper, but they won't work. And for me, these tariffs definitely won't work because the president is elected every 4 years, and everyone knows that. And like you were saying, these companies have no incentive to bring manufacturing, even with tariffs. They know Trump has 4 years. If the economy tanks because tariffs cause inflation or unemployment, he will be voted out in 2020. And so I don't see how tariffs will work.
You know, I did want to ask you, Sarah, about the H-1B visa issue, which you are so associated for, and you've gotten attention around the country. Has there been any kind of inkling of a new policy under the new administration and Congress that will take care of, you know, workers from Disney and IBM who have lost their jobs to IT workers from overseas?
We have not seen that, and any tariff is not going to have any effect on the offshoring of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of jobs of the technology that has gone overseas from all of the American companies that I deal with. So, A, the tariffs aren't going to do anything for technology jobs that we've lost, which I think accounts for a large portion of jobs that we lost. And there's an H-1B ideas floating around, new bills are being proposed, and Trump has a couple things discussed, but nothing has happened
And the
yet.
last time we had you on, I know that Bill Nelson was supportive of your efforts. What about Marco Rubio?
Marco Rubio was previously about increasing H-1Bs, which is bad for the American workers. I haven't heard yet if he's changed his mind, but I doubt it.
Thank you. Before we go, we want to share with you what some of our viewers are saying about last night's topic, tiny houses. You may have seen these types of homes on cable TV or on the internet, but a man in Venice thinks they could be part of the answer to the problem of affordable housing. We asked you what you thought about the idea, and Nina Powers writes, sounds good. Not everyone needs a 2,000 square foot house to live in and can't afford that rent. This would fill a rental gap for the working poor who doesn't mind living in a smaller home the size of many apartments. Hope this can get off the ground. Tracy Dietrich writes, a community consists of people who have a vested interest in their community. For firefighters, nurses, waiters, and waitresses to be priced out of their community and given the option of tiny houses is ludicrous. Jack Notstein writes, about time could be built as small communities with common parks, amenities, and safety located in areas where public transportation serves with affordable shopping nearby. Let us know what you think about President Trump's economic policies and how they could affect you by visiting our Facebook page at facebook.com/news@7. And FYI, want to watch past Roundtable discussions? They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. Thanks to our guests for being here tonight. Richard Stern is the business commentator for ABC7 News. Tracy Collins is an assistant professor of economics at New College of Florida. And Sarah Blackwell is an attorney with the Blackwell firm, as well as the founder and CEO of Protect U.S. Workers.